Hello, and welcome to another edition of Sri's Sunday New York Times Read Along. Our guest this week is Subodh Chandra. You can find him on Twitter at Subodh Chandra. He's the founder and managing partner of the Chandra Law Firm. He's a civil rights attorney based in Cleveland. His firm filed criminal charges in Springfield, Ohio against Donald Trump and J.D. Vance on behalf of the Haitian Bridge Alliance. We are live on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, and our Digimentors website. We're also live on Instagram. For everyone watching on replay, thank you so much for taking the time. We always appreciate it when you watch later. Feel free to leave a comment, and we'll do our best to respond, particularly if you mention us. Please like, comment, share, retweet, do all the things you do on social media to make sure that people find the show. And let us know where you're watching from. Leave a comment. If you're watching on Facebook in particular, make sure you press play on the video so that we can see your comment. We have a great show planned. In addition to Subodh being our guest, we also will, of course, review the New York Times. And we will also look at a special section from New York Times Cooking. It's their 10th anniversary of their app, and they have put together some of the best recipes based on user comments, based on things that have been saved, starred, and commented. 25 of their greatest hits. You can find the PDF on our website, digimentors.group/New York Times Read Along. Feel free to grab it. And unlike the New York Times for Kids, that PDF won't go away. So you can get it anytime you would like. Again, let's take a hello to some of the folks watching. Jonathan is offering greetings from the East Village. Jonathan, always great to have you. Diane is watching on Twitter. She says, good morning from Margate, New Jersey. What an important show to listen to. Thank you, Diane. Doug Levy is up early in the pre-dawn darkness near San Francisco. And Doug, in about a couple of weeks after the time change, it'll be even darker this time of morning. Ellen is saying hi from the Upper East Side. Ellen, thank you, as always. Sujana is joining us from Rome. We have a traveler. Sujana is usually from the New York area, but Dr. Sujana Chandrasekhar, let us know what we're doing in Rome if you're there for a conference. Paula Kiger, longtime producer of the show, is checking in from Atlanta, Georgia. Paula, hope everyone in your family, your circle in Florida, were safe after Milton last week. We'll just say a few quick hellos before we bring Sri on. Stephen Kaplan, good morning from a beautiful fall morning here in Ramsey, New Jersey. Don't boo, vote. Hope everyone is well. And Stefan, loved the fall pictures you've been posting lately. Ken Fisher from Cedar Rapids, Iowa, and Sashi Belamkonda from Potomac, Maryland in the Washington, D.C. area. Now, without further ado, let's welcome our host, Sri Srinivasan. Sri, good morning.
Good morning, Neil, and welcome everyone. Thank you for watching, whether live or later. It's been almost 9 years since we've been doing this every Sunday, 8:30 to 10 a.m. Eastern time. We're live till then, and then we're archived. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, LinkedIn, and on digimentors.group. Please tag a friend who's interested in the news, who's interested in fighting misinformation and disinformation. We have a fantastic guest, a dear friend of multiple decades, who's in the news himself for this very important step that he has taken on behalf of the immigrants, the Haitian immigrants in Springfield, and the chaos that has been inflicted on their lives and the town of Springfield, Ohio. You'll meet Subodh Chandra in just a few minutes. Please tell us where you're watching from, and please tell us how your Sunday is going. And some of you, I think, are almost ready to vote. Some of you may have already voted, depending on where your state stands in terms of early voting, mail-in voting, all of that. and Subodh can talk about so many great issues. He also represented the Tamir Rice family in that horrible case of the wrongful death, and he will explain that story as well. We have so many people watching from around the world. We're very grateful to Pradnya Haldipur, former guest on the show, watching from Silver Spring, and Irish Stew Podcast is in the house. This is such a fun podcast, folks. Please take a listen. You don't have to be Irish, but a lot of us are told we are kind of Irish anyway. Big Irish family, and a great Irish greeting to all of you.
At least on St. Patrick's Day, we're all Irish, right?
Yes, exactly. Not too soon for planning your 10th anniversary edition, says Jonathan. Pradnya's already voted in Maryland, and this is one of the things that's confusing to folks outside of the U.S., that this is possible, even that you can vote more than a month early. Eric Schafferstein is watching in Ottawa. Thank you, Eric. Thank you for being here. All of you, we are so grateful to you. One thing you can do for us right now, hit share on the platform you're on. Subodh is doing that right now. He's going to my Twitter account, hitting retweet on there and saying, watch his show. He's going to my Facebook account and finding the live video and hitting share on that. He's going to LinkedIn and sharing that so he can share that with all his friends. And we are also live on Instagram, so you can watch there as well. Neil, you remember we had so many people complaining for years that we weren't live on Instagram, but now we are.
Yeah.
And by the way, folks, we're always looking for great guests for the show. Anyone who likes the news, and it's not just the New York Times that we read. We've read at the home of the deputy editor of the Washington Post. We read the Washington Post. We've been to Toronto and read the Globe and Mail. We've read the Chicago Daily
Sun-Times.
Chicago Sun-Times. We've read the Khaleej Times in Dubai. So this is about not the New York Times. It's about celebrating print. It's about celebrating the importance of fighting misinformation and disinformation. We're just going to quickly tell you what's in the paper, and then we're going to bring on Subodh. So on the paper today, let's just take a look here. The lead story is Democrats face significant drop in black voters, and we're going to ask Subodh about that. 2020 numbers are down. Trump chips at support among black men, new poll shows, and that's one of the reasons we saw President Obama out on the trail. Frenzied Musk is going all in to elect Trump, determined to deliver crucial swing state. I wonder which swing state. I guess it's Pennsylvania that he wants to deliver. The latest polling has Harris up in Pennsylvania, but down in Arizona. Hamas documents show search for October 7th allies, and ties to Beijing didn't impede aid to Adams. That's a local story here in New York, but lots of people paying attention. A nation of small households treats its dogs just like family is the headline here in Korea. Here is the family situation. Folks, I'm not in my usual home office because I've been kicked out of our apartment. It's our dog Tara's 9th birthday, and there's a party this morning, so I've been kicked out up here in the conference room. But you will get to see a nice view of New York that you don't often see. Right out this window, you can see the Empire State Building and parts of Midtown Manhattan, and also New York's latest skyscraper. That's called One Vanderbilt, right next to Grand Central Station. Some of you will know that part of New York. Let's see what else is in the paper, and then we'll bring Subodh on. In the book review, the story is The Matter of the Heart, Sally Rooney's new novel. Neil mentioned 10 years of NYT cooking that has made such impact on how the New York Times works as a business. They've always had recipes, but they've done something much, much bigger with New York Times cooking. 10 years you've cooked, saved, starred, and recommended. We've gathered our 25 greatest hits. So you'll want to get that. And if you don't subscribe to the paper, or you're not, you're a digital subscriber, we have the PDF for you. Go right now to Digimentors.group, look for the NYT Read Along button, click on Subodh's face, and you can download and have this PDF. It's for subscribers of the print section only and by special arrangement for the New York Times. Another reason it's a special issue is there's Al Pacino. He goes deep, a conversation with the legendary actor about, well, everything. And I love him on the show Hunters, if you haven't seen it. Sunday Styles cover is Declaration of Independence. Claudia Conway, a potential new face of the Republican Party. Claudia Conway instead went her own way. And she's the daughter of the two famous Conways who were Republicans. One of them has broken in a big way with Trump, as we know. And the Sunday Business cover is the Midas of Gridiron, how Roger Goodell became NFL's $20 billion man. And we'll ask Subodh, who lives in Ohio, which is the home of the NFL Hall of Fame, if he is a football fan and what his teams are. And the $1.7 trillion makeover, the U.S. military is spending mightily to overhaul the nation's outdated nuclear arsenal. So that reminds me that we should just mention that there's a story in yesterday's paper. First of all, look at this. The Northern Lights were visible in Chicago, were visible in parts of Manhattan this week. First time in many years. The Nobel Prize this year, in the Nobel Peace Prize this year, went to Nihon Hindankyo, a Japanese group of survivors of America's atomic blasts in Nagasaki and Hiroshima. And they won the Nobel Prize for their campaign to end nuclear weapons. So you can see the contrast between that and this story, where the New York Times is talking about the U.S. military overhauling its weaponry, its nuclear weapons. As some of you know, I have the honor of a lifetime to be a member of the outreach board of the Nobel Prizes and to be co-host, a digital co-host of the Nobel Peace Conference, which is a year celebrating the winner of the Nobel Prize. I just came back a couple of weeks ago from Oslo, where we hosted, and Neil and our team worked behind the scenes to produce the show. And we need the Nobel Peace Prize more than ever. I think now we are ready, as Subodh has been waiting very patiently behind the scenes. We have people watching from all over. Please tag your friends, welcome them to watch us live or later. And we want to hear from you throughout the show. You are now about to meet Subodh Chandra, who is a friend of many years. He filed criminal charges in Springfield, Ohio against Trump and Vance on behalf of the Haitian Bridge Alliance. He's a noted, distinguished civil rights lawyer and a friend of so many of us. We want you to welcome Subodh.
Thank you, Sri. Thanks for having me on.
Great to see you. Thank you for being here. Are you a Sunday morning person?
I am not an early riser at all. And so this is a privilege for me, not only to have my eyes open at this hour, but also to be with you. So I will make it through. I will power through. I do read the Sunday Times, but not this early.
Not this early. Do you, in fact, even get the printed paper? Is that correct?
I do. Yeah, we get it. I don't know if the edition looks exactly the same as the one that
Hold that up 1 second. We will do a comparison. Let's see if I can. I have so many papers around here. Here we go. Let's see if that looks the same. That's Neil's going to pull out his paper.
I'll pull out mine as well. Why not? So we have the same display story.
Yeah. Was this
probably the same lead stories?
Yeah.
But so the important note, and we've learned this from our conversations with Mike Connors, who runs the printing plant in College Point in New York, that the Times is printed at 27 different locations around the country every day. So you're probably getting it from a local plant. And I don't know if the Plain Dealer still does their own printing, but you know, when I was in Washington State, the Seattle Times printed it for the New York Times. Here, the Washington Post does. And what we've found is that when there's breaking news, of course, the New York edition can have the most up-to-date version.
Right.
But the national edition is actually sent out about 1 p.m. on Saturday afternoon. So anything late on Saturday doesn't make it in. I would like to say, Sri, before I jump off, you're talking about how long Subodh has been a longtime friend to many. Subodh and I have known each other for almost 30 years. We met on a campaign, congressional campaign for Ram Opaluri back in 1994. Subodh also knew my dad very well. So it's always great to have family on the show. Subodh, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's going to be fun.
Yeah, and we have a lot to talk about, and the weeks that we have left, right? Just less than a month. One of the things that I tell people is that I have never seen such a busy fall. Journalists and everyone's super distracted because of everything happening with the election, but also 2 hurricanes and variety of other big breaking news stories, 2 wars going on, and I just can't imagine what that's like when people like you, who are deeply invested in working in politics and the intersection of society, politics, the law. Just bring a greeting here from Kaveri Madhavan, who was a guest on this show a few weeks ago. She is an Irish Indian author and lives in Ireland. So interested to listen to your show, Sri and Subodh. This is such an important rights case, absolutely. And please tell your friends so they can join us. And we just have a comment that cats and dogs everywhere are grateful for that story that you saw about how Koreans treat dogs as family, and that's so nice to hear. So let's talk about you, and you pop up in the news over time in different ways because of the very important work you do as a civil rights lawyer. And we'll talk about the Springfield case in just a moment, but if you can just set the stage so people understand, what is a civil rights lawyer, what do you do, and where are you based? And then let's get into this very important story.
So I'm based in Cleveland, Ohio. Our practice is somewhat national in its focus. I mean, we'll practice just about anywhere we think that there are good causes to be pursued, and it makes sense to travel. A civil rights lawyer focuses on the areas of law that deal with basic fundamental rights that we have as Americans. So, say, for example, police misconduct, employment discrimination and retaliation, sexual harassment cases, pregnancy discrimination, First Amendment issues. And so that's the focus of our practice, has been for nearly 20 years. Before that, I was the law director for the city of Cleveland, so I was defending those types of cases. I had done similar defense work in Los Angeles before I moved to Cleveland. And you just think you've seen everything as a civil rights lawyer, and then something bizarre happens, or there's an abuse of rights that you find astonishing. I will say this, though, Sri, the environment for work, and I think most of my fellow civil rights lawyers in the employment space and in other spaces like police misconduct would agree, the work has become much more difficult over the years from a plaintiff's standpoint. Federal courts in particular have become increasingly conservative and hostile to these claims, throwing many of them out if they're federal constitutional claims, for example, for excessive force by police officers on so-called qualified immunity grounds, which is why the John Lewis Act and the George Floyd Act are so important, which have not passed Congress yet, but that the Democrats have sponsored, because we need a restoration of our ability to protect our rights as Americans. And I can't tell you the number of times I've had people of, conservative political persuasion who come to our office and their rights have been violated either through police misconduct or a First Amendment violation. And I have to sit and explain to them, yes, I agree with you. I think your rights were violated, but no, we can't take this case on because there aren't cases quite similar enough to this one in terms of how the rights were abused in this area, and therefore a federal court will throw it out on qualified immunity. So your rights are effectively unenforceable.
And they must be surprised about that.
I can't believe it. And I tell them that the judges, the justices that you love so much, that you're the presidents that you love so much appointed, are the ones who have eroded your rights and your ability to enforce your rights. And then I'll name names. I'll give them examples of decisions. I'll show them, look, in this decision, look how the court started enforcing this qualified immunity doctrine, which, by the way, is completely judicially manufactured. It's nowhere in any statutes. It's nowhere in the Constitution. And so, it can be quite an eye-opening experience for people. And I think, everybody values their own rights, but they don't value anybody else's. And then only when it becomes their problem are they suddenly realizing, oh my God, what do you mean I can't do anything?
And we've seen that with all kinds of folks who have suddenly become aware of issues when their own family is affected, right? We've seen that with LGBTQ rights, when Republicans, sometimes conservative Republicans, find out they have family members who are affected, then they suddenly change their tune. Tell us what we're looking at, and this is a very smart-looking video.
Yeah, so this is the homepage of our website, showing a number of our past and current lawyers in action in the courtroom.
I like that. And high-stakes civil rights advocates serving people throughout Ohio and across the nation. Let's talk about one of your very important cases, and then we're going to get to the Haitian immigrant story, the story of Tamir Rice. Many of us know that name from a collection of names of young African-American men and boys who have been in the news over the last 20 years, 15 years. Talk about your role, about the case, and then your role in that particular story.
So I was one of several lawyers on that legal team. I was the local lawyer on the ground in Cleveland in that case, and we had members of the team from New York and Chicago. And that was a deeply troubling case for me as a Clevelander and as a human being. This was a 12-year-old child, Tamir Rice, who in November of 2014 was playing with an airsoft pistol in front of a recreation center, but hadn't actually harmed anyone, didn't pose a threat to anyone. Nevertheless, somebody, called 911, which is fine. But the police officers, instead of approaching the scene cautiously and trying to determine what was going on, rushed upon the scene in a vehicle, and one officer jumped out of the car and fired immediately, killing Tamir immediately. Well, actually, he was transported to the hospital and was pronounced dead there later. So it was a troubling case because certainly as a child growing up in Oklahoma in the 70s, I mean, I would play out in my yard with, a cap gun that might look pretty realistic, those little, fake police revolver guns. We would even pry the red part out of the front, the safety part, to make it look more realistic, and wouldn't have expected to be shot dead by a police officer. So we handled that case not only from a civil standpoint, Sri, but also the most important thing for Samaria Rice, Tamir's mother. We're coming upon the 10th anniversary of that killing next month. The most important thing for her was criminal justice, seeing the officers responsible for the death of her child held accountable in some fashion. And unfortunately, in my opinion, the family was denied a fair process because the prosecutor was so heavily trying to use the grand jury process and the public face to try to exonerate the officers, that a lot of facts came out that showed that these officers were given special treatment that none of us would enjoy, which is a similar theme you'll see in the Haitian case in Springfield. And so it came out that the prosecutor, and he lost re-election, I think, as a result, the prosecutor had allowed these officers to come before the grand jury with pre-written statements exonerating themselves and endure no cross-examination whatsoever, which is something you and I would never get. I mean, in fact, our lawyers would tell us, my God, don't go there. You're going to get a withering cross-examination. But apparently by pre-arrangement, they were allowed to come give self-serving statements and not be cross-examined. And if I had cross-examined them as a prosecutor, I would have been asking Officer Lohman, well, wait a minute, you claim that you shouted out warnings, and yet it was a winter day and your fellow officer says that the window was rolled up. Are you in the habit of shouting out warnings as you are, rushing upon someone with the window rolled up? It doesn't make any sense, the explanation that was given for the conduct. So this issue of special treatment for some people seems to be a big theme in my career. And it's the main thing that I'm fighting all the time, is to try to hold people accountable to the rule of law and to try to enforce equal justice under law.
Equal justice under law is of course, the premise under which you're able to go after a lot of folks. Here's Doug Levy watching, as we said, very early on the West Coast. Aren't there some states that have recently added versions of immunity for police? It's part of the absurd and offensive backlash against civil rights after the George Floyd murder.
I think there is an increasing trend of that. And there was an effort here in Ohio that did not make it onto the ballot through, in my view, some chicanery by state officials to try to abolish qualified immunity and its enforceability in the state of Ohio. It is a federal defense manufactured by the U.S. Supreme Court. But nevertheless, there was an effort here to try to prevent its invocation by officers. And I want to say this in fairness, because again, as I mentioned at the beginning, I did defense work for a significant part of my career. The original concept of qualified immunity was at least something worth considering, which is there might be split-second judgments that not just police officers, but also other government officials undertake, and you don't want them necessarily held liable on a technicality. They need to be able to do their jobs in good faith. That was the original concept for why courts made this up. But what's happened over time is we've seen an increasingly conservative Supreme Court and increasingly conservative federal appeals courts start to say, even though previous precedent said you don't have to have a case directly on point to enforce the Constitution, increasingly we're seeing courts say, well, this case isn't exactly like or close enough to the previous cases. So, gee, how is the officer supposed to know? Gee, how is the government official supposed to know? And it just doesn't hold water sometimes when you're dealing with one of these cases like, okay, come on, this was a surrendering suspect on the ground. Why should the officer tase them? Well, in the previous case, the officer was face down on the ground, and in this one, they were on their, the suspect was face down on the ground, and in this one, the suspect was on their knees with their hands up. I mean, that kind of thing. And we've seen examples like that in the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals that governs Ohio. And you just can't believe it when you read the decision. You're going, I mean, that is a distinction without a difference. And so it's making the Constitution harder to enforce. There's fewer civil rights lawyers that want to do this work and bear the economic risk, understandably, of trying to pursue those cases for months or years and then wind up with nothing. So this is the challenge, and it's why we really need greater balance in our federal courts. We need an expanded U.S. Supreme Court, in my view, and we need the kind of reform that Congress has in front of it, but unfortunately the Senate Republicans won't let go forward, or the House majority.
Such an important set of issues that we need to talk about. And Subodh, thank you for your leadership on this. Kaveri says, more power to you. Ron Thomas, former guest on the show, is watching from Dubai. He's traveling every week, but always checks in. We're so grateful. Everyone, please hit share on your platforms right now. Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, LinkedIn, Instagram, or you can just go to our website, digimentors.group. By the way, if you go to digimentors.group, look for the New York Times Read Along tab and Subodh's episode, and you can get for yourself, this is a real treat, a print edition, a PDF edition of 10 years of New York Times cooking and 25 of their most popular recipes. Many of you have seen the various things that they have posted that have been famous, like the gochujang caramel cookies, and the sheet pan bibimbap, the chili crisp fettuccine alfredo. Are you a cook and chef, Mr. Chandra?
To some degree. I seem to have been bumped out of the kitchen by most of my family. But yes, I do enjoy it when I get a chance to roll up my sleeves.
Folks, that's Subodh Chandra, noted civil rights lawyer who fights for the justice for people to get justice around Ohio and across the nation. We're very grateful to him for being here. This is the New York Times Read Along. I'm Sri Srinivasan, and we talk about the news here, and we will read the newspaper in just a bit. Tell us a little bit about your own journey. There have been times where you've been on the other side working to defend government officials because you were the law manager for the city of Cleveland, which means you were representing the government and therefore had to defend the the cases that were brought against the city. So what was that like? And then how and why did you make the switch?
Well, here's what I would say is that, at least in my experience serving as law director for the city of Cleveland, most of the cases of governmental misconduct that were brought against the city, I viewed factually as meritless. So, for example, there might be a suit filed on behalf of a family where somebody had died tragically, and they had been killed by police, but it would have been a situation in which the individual that was shot was using force against the police, deadly force, or was, ramming police with a vehicle or something like that. And in those instances, I felt very comfortable defending those cases as meritless, in my view. I also had the opportunity and the responsibility of reviewing somewhere between, I think it was 22 to 26 instances of deadly force brought by police officers to try to determine whether criminal charges were warranted against those individuals. And in at least 3 instances, we thought criminal charges were warranted and sought to pursue them. Sometimes those were then dead on arrival at the county prosecutor's office, which is a whole other problematic story. But there were some gray zone cases right in the middle. This is in the era before body cams and dash cams, which really have wound up being, I think, police officers' best friends to be able to prove their innocence in many instances. But we would see these instances, we wouldn't have video. And based on the available evidence, I might be suspicious about the officer's conduct, but didn't have sufficient evidence to prove those cases. And ultimately, I decided to pursue this work as a plaintiff's lawyer because I became deeply impressed by some of the best plaintiff's lawyers. I'm thinking of Al Gerhardstein, for example, who ultimately worked on the Obergefell case involving marital equality. Deeply impressed by him as my opposing counsel, and I could see that the truly great civil rights lawyers are the ones who are willing to put in the work into their cases and are very passionate about them, and having the scars to bear when, I was defeated or spanked by these great lawyers. I said, boy, I want to be one of those people.
And that inspired you, including when you didn't win. So that's fascinating. Tell us about your run for public office.
Well, I've run for office twice, I guess both misbegotten adventures. One for Ohio Attorney General amidst a massive statewide scandal where I thought, we needed an anti-corruption attorney general. That was back in the 2006 cycle. And then a few years later, I ran for county prosecutor as a reform candidate, similar to Kamala Harris's platform when she served as San Francisco DA, the Smart on Crime platform, a reform-minded platform. In both instances, in the AG's race, I came in second in the primary. I think I received the highest ratio of glowing newspaper endorsements to least votes received in Ohio history in that primary. And then when I ran for county prosecutor, I came in third in a field of 5 or 6. So, it was apparent that that was not necessarily the path for me, and that I need to continue to pursue public service through the private sector.
Subodh, I'll just jump in and say, at least you weren't running in 1994 with the Newt Gingrich and the Contract for America taking over everything. That was a rough year for folks to run.
Yeah, and legislative office had never been appealing to me because the idea of having to argue with 100 people to get something done didn't appeal to me. I like to actually, serve in executive office.
Sure. No, I think it's important for folks to note that, when you make that decision, there's a long lead time between when you're, planning a run and thinking about it, and the environment changes while you're doing that. So where you think you might have a window, where you think you might have a lane to run in, all of a sudden you run into a juggernaut. And Ohio has turned, very purple, if not almost a little bit red. I know Sherrod Brown is pretty red.
Yeah.
Sherrod Brown is having a tough time holding on to his seat. Just want to say a quick hello to my mom. Hi, Mom, from
Wonderful.
Hastings on Hudson,
Hi,
New York.
Auntie.
Great to see her. Great to see
You
her.
know her, of course, as well.
I will say that the way that Ohio has changed, it was a bellwether, right? It was
Yeah.
the way that Ohio would vote, you would know that that's the way the election was likely to go. There's some stat about how many elections in a row, at the presidential level anyway, that Ohio got right, and now it's gone right.
Well,
And
but Sri, I think it's important for the listeners to understand something, that yes, and it's clear that in the last couple presidential elections, Ohio has gone pretty red. But Barack Obama won Ohio in 2008. He won it in 2012. It is still, in my view, and can be a purple state. The issue has been that it's been so heavily redistricted by the Republicans in charge, with these bizarre gerrymandered districts that are just so weird and shameless, you can't even believe them. And so on the ballot right now in Ohio is issue 1, a redistricting reform amendment that has actually been sponsored by the former Republican Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Ohio, Maureen O'Connor. And the Republican Secretary of State rewrote the ballot summary in a way that is extremely biased, and anybody reading it that's a low information voter is going to want to vote no to it because it makes it look like it's pro gerrymandering. So it's important that everybody who's listening from Ohio understand you want to vote yes on issue 1, and that ballot summary language is misleading, inaccurate, and biased. Because these are the games that politicians play when they don't want citizens to be able to select their politicians, but want it to remain the other way around. If we get real redistricting reform in Ohio, then I think Ohio becomes a competitive purple state again, and a bellwether state again.
And this is some of the, we're looking at, tell us what we're looking at about the gerrymandering. Look at the shape of some of these counties and electoral districts. I will just say we have an international audience, and trying to explain gerrymandering in less than an hour is going to be difficult. So we won't get into that. But I do want to now move on to the most recent case that you've been in national news for, about the chaos caused by Donald Trump in that famous debate with Kamala Harris, where he suddenly started saying they're eating the dogs, they're eating the cats. And walk us through, you're watching that show, you're watching the debate like all of us. We were at a debate watching party at our house. We brought some friends over. Set that scene for us and tell us your relationship, if any, with the town of Springfield at that moment.
So let me just first off by saying, I think I mentioned earlier in our discussion, Sri, that I am a First Amendment lawyer. Okay, so I am a champion of free speech in my litigation work, and whether it's for media or whether it's for individuals, whether it's for public employees speaking out on matters of public concern. But the First Amendment and free speech rights in America are not unlimited. Most famously, it's been said you can't shout fire in a crowded theater if there's no fire, right? And so let me just begin by saying that as I'm watching the debate and I'm watching Donald Trump just make up a bunch of nonsense about Haitians in Springfield, saying they're eating the dogs and eating the cats, I chalked it up to, this is another outrageous, xenophobic, racist thing by Donald Trump. And we just put it in a long line of Donald Trumpisms that are that racist and xenophobic, including, let's not forget, his origin story as one of the original Obama birther people, right? So it's nothing new from Donald Trump. It's just a new twist on his sort of perverted view of the world and his efforts to hate monger. So if you left it there, I would say that's just protected free speech. But that's not where they left it. And so where they started crossing the line into a free speech violation was when they were relentlessly and persistently, he and J.D. Vance kept repeating these lies, including the lie that the Haitians that are in Springfield are there illegally, which is totally false. They're there on legal status. And they kept doing it even as they saw the chaos ensue. And even as they heard the mayor and the city manager and the governor say, this is false, please stop. And what we learned also then was that J.D. Vance's staff had contacted City Hall the day before Trump made his false statements in the debate and had asked, is this true? And the city manager told, I believe it was the New York Times, I told him it isn't true. I told the staff this was false. So this was knowing dissemination of false statements, which by itself can be First Amendment protected. But it was the relentlessness and persistence while sowing chaos, inducing panic, making false alarms, disrupting public services, resulting in 33 bomb threats, threats to the mayor and his family, school closures and evacuations, college closures and evacuations, festival being canceled, and just heightened emergency alerts, the mayor having to assume emergency powers. It's that chaos that is the crime. So if you like, I mean, I can turn to sort of very quick summary of the legal issue, which is that why are these criminal acts? Because there are statutes in Ohio that make it felonies to engage in disrupting public service, inducing panic, making false alarms, aggravated menacing, say threatening force against people where it's unwarranted. In this case, Donald Trump threatening to deport legal Haitian immigrants to Venezuela, a place that they've never known. Conspiracy, complicity, attempts, aiding and abetting, all these things are illegal. And the case law in Ohio, you know, I've seen a lot of First Amendment scholars and professors have a knee-jerk reaction to the charges and go, oh, no, this is all First Amendment protected. These are individuals who haven't hit the books, right? We hit the books. And where you really find the law is in Ohio criminal law, in which individuals have tried to invoke a First Amendment defense and have been soundly rejected. So, for example, there was a man who called TV and radio stations and said that a bridge had been sabotaged, and he was charged with inducing panic. And his defense was a First Amendment defense, that he had a political motive for what he was saying. He was a government employee. He was unhappy about something. He said, this is political speech. And an Ohio court rejected his First Amendment defense because the result, and apparently intended result, had been to induce panic. So all we were asking is that Ohio courts apply to J.D. Vance and Donald Trump the same law and the same standards that would apply to you, to me, to any of the people listening today. And they refuse to do that.
So now what happens?
Well, so the court did some interesting things. One of the things that it did was make up a special procedure just for Donald Trump and J.D. Vance. See, ordinarily, when you file, these are private citizen-initiated criminal charges, which are permitted by statute in Ohio.
Not in most states, right? You can't.
There are a handful of states. I think there's probably 11 or so where you can do this. And so a private citizen can file these criminal charges in the form of a sworn affidavit, which my clients at the Haitian Bridge Alliance did. And once that's filed, what you would ordinarily expect is for a municipal court to randomly assign it as it would any other case, and there would be a single judge deciding it. Instead, what this court did was issue an order saying, because of the importance of this case, read between the lines, special treatment for Donald Trump and J.D. Vance. We are going to assign this to the whole court en banc, meaning the whole municipal court. 3 judges are going to consider it. And so then they got together, talked to each other, and wrote a lead opinion, and then there was a concurring opinion. But what they did was they violated the normal process that you would expect a court to engage in. They gave special treatment to J.D. Vance and Donald Trump. And so what we're studying right now is, what are the remedies for that? And what we may be seeing, and what we're considering right now, is a mandamus action before a higher court to order the municipal court to do it right. And now these judges are all tainted because they all already considered this, and again, touted the First Amendment, ignored completely the authority that we gave them, just ignored it, pretended it didn't exist. And another troubling thing that they did, Sri, was they misrepresented the record that we presented to them. So, for example, they claimed, the concurring opinion claimed, that the governor, the mayor, and the city manager had somehow never said that what J.D. Vance and Donald Trump were saying was false. That statement is false. We have video that we submitted from the governor saying this is wrong. I don't know how it can get any clearer than that, but the court misrepresented the record before it in its written opinion. All of these things are deeply troubling, and the court denied our clients a hearing, which the case law requires if the court is hesitant to issue a ruling. So we think that that flouting of basic legal standards, principles, equal justice under law is something that we're studying right now, and it's something that we're considering pursuing in a mandamus action.
Wow, thank you. I feel like I'm getting a law class lesson here. Thank you for fighting for those Haitian immigrants, legal immigrants. That's important for people to understand. Folks, that's Subodh Chandra, noted civil rights attorney fighting for justice. And I'm Sri Srinivasan. This is the New York Times Read Along. We're going to read the New York Times in just a few minutes. We just want to hear a little bit more from Subodh about his career, about his journey. One of the ways in which we are connected, Subodh, is having what they call multiples in children. We have twins, you have triplets, and those triplets have been kind of had a public life because you talk about them. And there's a famous photograph of the three of them. Tell us about that. And they were little.
Well, I mean, it's been quite a journey, right? We have, and they're not just triplets, so they're identical twins and a fraternal, which gives its own interesting dynamic. They're all boys. And there's a couple of famous photos. I mean, there's the one when Senator George Allen of Virginia called a young man of Indian origin macaca, where the boys, they were toddlers and they were wearing "Who You Callin' Macaca" t-shirts, you know, to illustrate the point that these young boys are as American as anybody else. You know, how dare you engage in this sort of racial slur? And then over the course of elections over the years, you know, as babies, they were protesting the election of George W. Bush, crying all simultaneously. I think it was a coincidence, but it made for a great photograph. And then celebrating the election of Barack Obama.
So let's go back and see this photo.
Yeah. There's a "Who You Callin' Macaca" t-shirt. That's on the American Prospects website in a piece I wrote about the Senator George Allen incident. And it's amazing. I mean, that incident was years ago, and yet it seems like we're still dealing with the same kind of homophobia, indeed worse. And at least Senator George Allen was hounded out of public service even by his own fellow Republicans in those days. And instead, what we're seeing with Donald Trump is a kind of enabling of his xenophobia and racism and, at a minimum, deep indifference to it. So if anything, some things have gotten worse in the political arena.
Last night, I'll just say, last night was the 30th anniversary of SAJA, South Asian Journalists Association, which I co-founded, as you know, and we had Ali Velshi as keynote speaker, and he said something interesting. Everybody asked about AI ruining the news and everything else, and he says, "Why are you worried about AI? Prominent people are lying today and getting away with it today, making up stories, lying about things today. So why do you think AI is going to ruin things? How much worse could AI be than what's already happened, what we're all tolerating now?" By the way, Eric says parents of multiples rule. And so just finish the story of the triplets, please.
Well, so, you know, then over the years, it's been kind of fun to see the boys themselves become, you know, politically engaged and interested in what's going on. They're huge fans of The West Wing. I mean, I've lost count of the number of times they've seen the series, which is amazing because the whole thing, as you know, was, you know, shot before they were born, much of it. But they're really into it. And I think during the Trump years, it gave them kind of a safe space of how politics can be. And it's like comfort food for them. And it's been one thing that's been really interesting, Sri, has been the degree to which the switch between President Biden, who I think they respect, but the switch from him to Vice President Kamala Harris as the Democratic standard bearer, I think has gotten them more excited and more engaged, more committed to voting, more committed to talking to their friends. And that's been really an interesting thing to see, that passing of the generational torch seems to have made a difference, at least in my family, in the next generation. Because otherwise, there's a kind of cynicism, I think, that is underlying things. I mean, these are kids. I like to think that they were inspired by their youth in the Obama era, but I think a lot of their political consciousness has been in the Trump era, where they've seen relentless lies. And so that's going to leave an underlying cynical residue that has to be overcome. And this is a picture of them with the vice president, then Senator Harris.
Amazing. I always joke that we got through our twins because you had triplet boys under 3 or 4 at that time. And so we would look at you and say, oh my God, this is easy. The twins are easy. Just as people with single children would watch our situation and say, oh my God, having one child is so easy compared to having multiples. What did you learn being a lawyer, and all the great things you've done in your career help you to manage 3 boys?
I don't know that they're connected. All that I do know is that my wife, who's also a civil rights lawyer, and I do seem to have alienated the boys from any interest in the practice of law. So there's something either we did right or we didn't do right, in terms of them seeing what that is like. And that's fine. They're welcome to pursue other things, and they should. But it was interesting to me that despite, I think, having some growing up in a home with some social consciousness, the law is definitely not for them.
And just to bring this back together, you mentioned the vice president before, when she was attorney general in San Francisco, running for attorney general of California. She came to New York, and I videotaped, and I shot a little video of her talking about how she became politically conscious very early, because Shyamala Gopal and her mother would go to rallies in a stroller with her.
Civil rights marches, yeah.
Yep. And that made a big difference. And of course, her sister is also a famed expert and someone who's been fighting for social justice at the ACLU and other places as well. And Eric says parents of multiples rule. And Ron Thomas says this show is always a masterclass. Beautiful. Thank you, Ron. That means a lot. Mary C. Curtis is watching. And Mary says, joining from Charlotte, North Carolina, thank you for your work, Subodh. Trump and Vance aren't even pretending anymore. The message for the rest of the campaign is demonizing migrants, stoking fear and division. Will it work, in your opinion?
I hope not. I just, it clearly works with some segment of the electorate, and that's why they do it. They're trying to mobilize a base that would rather blame other people for their perceived problems than, focus on improving themselves. But I just have to hold on to some hope and belief that collectively the American people will reject this, that they've had enough, that it's just too much hatred, too much sowing of division. And I'll tell you why I'm a little bit encouraged, Mary. I hope this resonates with you. Right now the polling numbers for Vice President Harris aren't great in Ohio, but we've received an enormous amount of positive feedback from the Springfield area about the criminal charges we filed. And I'm not talking about Haitians. The impact of that community was on Springfield as a whole. Trump and Vance they wreaked havoc on Springfield as a whole. There were parents and families, regardless of race, who couldn't send their kids to school, who had to stop working, who had to bring their kids home. There were parents whose kids were in college, where the colleges were shut down and went to remote learning. I mean, the whole community was affected. And so we got a lot of positive feedback, to my surprise, from non-Haitians saying, thank you for doing this. We really appreciate it. We wish our prosecutor would act. We wish our public officials would act, and they need to be held accountable. So now that may be a skewed level of representation. I'm not saying otherwise, but at least it gives you some sense that there are people of goodwill in this country everywhere who reject the politics of division and the politics of hate, And I think the vice president has been speaking very articulately and forcefully about that, saying we need to put that behind us and we need to move forward and come together. So, and when you see the number of former Trump administration folks and former Bush administration folks and Reagan administration folks who are stepping forward and saying we need to come together and restore our democracy, it starts to give me some hope. So that's all I can do, is try to hang on to some hope and hope that we pull this out by a sliver, and that we start to put this era into our rearview mirror.
Yeah, the people are not remembering the chaos. Every day, something new, chaotic things would happen during the Trump administration. In addition, and often from his own people who would be in the news revealing things and leaking things and all of that. You work a lot with the African American community. A headline like this, what does it say to you? Where they're talking about a significant drop in Black voters, and the numbers are down since 2020 and chipping away at Black men. We should note that when they said he made great inroads in 2020, it was a couple of percentage points. It wasn't like, 20 percentage point drop at that time. But what do you think what's happening now?
Well, it's interesting. I've been studying voting trends since college, and for years, through the time that I wrote a senior honors thesis as an undergrad, there was a downward trend in voter participation over the course of decades, across the board, across all demographic groups. And we saw that trend, as I recall, reversed for the first time in the election of Barack Obama in 2008, where you saw increased voter turnout across the board, but particularly in the African American community, as people were stepping up in pride and excitement about this opportunity to make history with a truly gifted and extraordinary candidate. I have been a bit puzzled by the degree to which that same enthusiasm hasn't necessarily translated across the board within the African American community, at least according to this polling data. I don't know how worried to be about it, how concerned to be about it. I think one of the big differences we've seen between 2008 and now is the ability to sow targeted disinformation has increased exponentially. And so as a consequence, if one can figure out ways, either through TikTok or other social media channels, Instagram, to try to sow disinformation targeted at particular demographic groups, then one pursues it, which is what we've seen the Trump camp do, and the billionaires allied with them. And so that might be affecting some of these numbers. I know it was controversial. I'm glad that President Obama spoke up. I think he speaks with moral authority. And I can just only hope that these numbers don't continue in this manner. And it's just not about one person. It's not about Kamala Harris. It's really about the policy issues at stake. If you care about civil rights, and if you're African American, you should, if you care about the issue of excessive police force, if you care about voting rights and whether people have access to the ballot, there's only one party that stands for reform and protecting those rights. There's only one party sponsoring the George Floyd Policing Act, the Reform Act. There's only one party sponsoring the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, which, by the way, is named for the great African-American champion of civil rights, John Lewis, may he rest in peace, who wanted every single one of us to vote. And so that's just the reality. There used to be a time in this country where there were Northeast Republicans and Western Republicans from the Western United States who would support many of these reforms and were champions of civil rights allied with Democrats. And it would be some Southern Democrats that would be opposed to them. Those times have changed. The realignment in politics is very significant. And so we are not going to see the kinds of economic reforms, tax reform, where we have greater taxes on billionaires and tax relief for the middle class and the working class, support for entrepreneurship, and civil rights protections. We're just not going to see them if Donald Trump is elected. We're going to see the exact opposite. So this becomes very frustrating because you get concerned about the prospect of people voting against their own self-interest. And the only way to do that is to try to break through, to correct that, is to try to break through the disinformation and get people to understand who stands for what and who's allied with them. So apparently the Harris campaign is struggling with that in the face of this disinformation. And I can only hope that, I mean, voting has already started. In Ohio, early voting has already started. In other states, it has. One can only hope that this gets adjusted and corrected as we move toward Election Day.
Thank you. Neil is saying that we have a mailing list to be alerted about our great guests, our great offers of PDFs from the New York Times, et cetera, where you can get free access to certain special sections. We're going to look at the cooking section in just a moment, and just drop him a note, neil@digimentors.group. And if anyone would like to sponsor the show or sponsor an episode, please let us know. We're going to be paying very close attention to the elections as we get closer to November 5th. You were talking about the havoc being caused and targeted social media. Here you go, Elon Musk, who claims to be centrist. He is such a liar in so many ways, and he's found a home with Donald Trump. Hamas documents show search for October 7th allies, extensive planning to deceive Israel and recruit Iran. Ties to Beijing didn't impede aid to Mayor Adams here in New York. And then this story of a town in Florida where it's been so ravaged by hurricanes that finally people are looking at the future of life in coastal areas. Now, you're safe in Ohio from hurricanes, but you have tornadoes and other things. You deal with people every day in your law practice. What is it about Americans, more perhaps than any other people, that they don't do things in their best interest? They build in flood zones. They vote against their own pocketbook and their own interests. Can you give me a sense of why it is that humans or Americans are like that?
I think a big part of it is the new fragmented media environment that we're in. So that when I was growing up, every night, as soon as my father would get home, we would be watching Walter Cronkite and the CBS Evening News. And that was a matter of almost religious fervor, and remember how he ended the broadcast. He said, "And that's the way it is." And that's the way it was. I mean, he reported straight facts, and you never got any sense whatsoever from Uncle Walter about any sort of partisan bias. And there were 3 networks, and they all pretty much ran their broadcasts the same way. There were high journalistic standards. And now you have this fragmented media environment where you've got extremist right-wing outlet, for example, taking over a lot of the local media stations, forgetting the name of it. Sinclair. And, when you see the coverage of the extremist propaganda that they're running and the stories that they're ignoring, I mean, it's quite shocking, actually, that they would do this so shamelessly. And of course, you watch Fox for a short period of time, particularly those so-called opinion broadcasts that run in the evening. And it's just, they're ignoring major stories. They're lying. I just saw Sean Hannity absolutely lying about what was going on in Florida and the federal relief being provided. Just lie. Now, you'd think they might have reformed themselves after the several $100 million defamation verdict that they received, but apparently not. So that fragmented media means that people are getting their information from not straight news sources. And that then results in a kind of corruption of their thinking or their assumptions about the facts in the world, and leads to the kind of strange numbers that we're seeing.
Thank you, folks. That's our friend Subodh Chandra. We're reading the New York Times together, and we do this on Sundays at 8:30 a.m. Eastern. We go till 10. And then we're live, and the recording is on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, LinkedIn. And if you're watching on Subodh's channels, thank you very much for joining us. I know he has shared our show. And there's President Jimmy Carter, who has co-written or written 32 books. Tell us about your own interest in putting down, writing kind of longer, looking back, those kinds of things, just for yourself.
I don't have time. I mean, I'd love to, I've often thought about it, but it's just something I just haven't had the time to do. And I admire those people that have the self-discipline to sit down and spend hours and hours writing. I spend so much time writing as an advocate for clients that then opening up space for myself to sit down and write reflections, it's not something I've been able to pursue. I'd like to do it one day. One of my colleagues here in Cleveland, who's a longtime civil rights lawyer of 40 or 50 years, finally sat down and wrote a memoir, and it's page turner. It's interesting, gives you a glimpse into the history of civil rights law in Ohio going back decades. And I hope that people do wind up doing that sort of thing, because it's important. I mean, it's important for me. Behind me, you see a bunch of civil rights biographies and autobiographies, and they're important to me because they give me a window into what came before.
Thank you. I should tell you that at Digimentors, we don't just do these productions. We also work with lots of great nonprofits, among them some that are deeply connected into civil rights and social justice, the Southern Poverty Law Center, the John and Lillian Miles Lewis Foundation. We are honored so much to work with them, Justice Aid, Black Voters Matter, all of these organizations. We take great pride in working with all our clients, but working with them in particular. I wanted to show you this section here, memoirs to read if you're struggling with mental health. And so many of us are. And Neil, by the way, has a terrific show that we should tell everybody about. Neil. It's called Shining Light on Shadows. And it's his show where twice a month he brings on fantastic guests. He and Don talk to folks about various issues of mental health issues. And it's been so great to see the success of this. Episode 17 was recently in September. He's doing something that I think is very difficult for men to do, and especially South Asian men. It's almost impossible to recall anyone else doing what he's doing, talking about depression and other health issues. So Neil, thank you for what you do every month to talk about issues around mental health.
Twice a month, actually. Our next episode is coming up on Thursday. Stephen Berbecco, who works with United Way of Northwest Vermont, is going to be sharing about their mental health initiative. Our show has featured people talking about their own challenges with mental health, and we've had therapists on, and it's just been an incredible experience. And it's one of the things, Sri, that I've shared. I struggle myself with anxiety and occasional depression, and I never would have said those words out loud before launching this show. But the whole goal is to lower the stigma around mental health, to normalize the conversation. So I wanted to thank, in particular, you and Digimentors for your support of the show, giving the time and space to produce it twice a month. It really means a lot. Thank you.
Thank you for doing that. And then this is what might surprise people. I'm looking here at these memoirs and several books here, but I want to point out this book, Born to Run by Bruce Springsteen. So many of us would say, wow, Bruce has a perfect life. He's doing such great things and traveling the world and inspiring people. And here it talks about, in Bruce Springsteen's barreling account of being a rock star, he provides an all-access pass to his decades-long struggles with depression and the care he takes with the help of medications and ongoing therapy to maintain his mental health. Some of us who are big Bruce fans know this, but to a lot of people, that would be a surprise that someone like him not only is going through this, but is willing to talk about this. Subodh, your thoughts?
Well, look, it's becoming increasingly apparent that a lot of very high functioning, high achievement folks do so through the fog of struggle, whether it's anxiety or depression or both. And, I've certainly struggled with those kinds of issues in my life and have known family members who have as well. And I'm glad that the stigma from that is finally being lifted. And I'm glad that we see role models like Bruce Springsteen talking openly about that as well. And if people can reach out to some of those resources, including those memoirs, and find the inspiration to either soldier through or to get help that they need, I think it's a wonderful thing.
Thank you. Thank you for saying that. Look at the story. Long immigrant friendly, Canada is changing course. Tighter policy leaves thousands in limbo is the headline that we are looking at here, and tells you something about how the world is changing. And Ali Velshi said, everyone in the world is watching these elections. If America goes to the extreme right, as it might, it is already right, but if it goes extreme right, then you're giving permission to so many governments in the world to act in a certain way. Strongmen, authoritarian dictators are all going to move in that direction. And that's really problematic. Kaveri says, shining light literally is shining a light. Thank you, Kaveri, for watching.
Sri, I want to mention something while we're on this topic. Look, I mean, I don't know if you had this experience, but I certainly did, and many of your listeners may. When I was growing up in Oklahoma in the late 1970s, early 1980s, and the Iranian hostage crisis was going on, my family and I, and certainly close family friends in the Indian American community, faced an incredible amount of discrimination as that was going on, as we would be mistaken for Iranian. Not that that would have justified the kind of discriminatory conduct. During the first Gulf War, my younger brother had a gun pulled on him in a gas station not too far from our home. Discrimination is indiscriminatory. And so when somebody like J.D. Vance and Donald Trump foment the kind of hate that they're fomenting against Haitians in Springfield, they're fomenting hate against everyone. It's like setting off a dirty bomb. You're going to wind up hurting everybody and not just the particular community that you're targeting. And people need to understand that. I'm so thunderstruck by J.D. Vance engaging in this conduct because he knows better. He's married to a South Asian woman. He has children that are half South Asian. And does he not understand the dirty bomb that he's playing with? That he can't just say, oh, well, just go hate those people. When you foment hate, you foment indiscriminate hate. So I think this is the struggle of our time, is these kinds of reactionary, the reactionary conduct that we're seeing throughout the globe. Unless we stand firm against it, and unless we firmly articulate our, secular values and our inclusive values and champion them and defend them and stand firmly against this hate, the impact is going to go well beyond, I think, even what those who are promulgating it intend.
Well, that is a clear warning, everyone, from Subodh. We have just about 15 minutes left. We have a lot of things to cover. We're going to look right now at the New York Times special cooking section, and you can download this from our website. Look right on the website on screen right now, digimentors.group/NYTReadalong. Digimentors.group, and look for the read along button, and then scroll down to Subodh's face, and there you'll be able to watch the show, watch the recording, but you also get this 25 greatest recipes in the New York Times, and they've collected this because it's the 10th anniversary, and this is their first recipe here is shakshuka with feta, which I have made from the New York Times. It's a great recipe. They produce it so well online and in print. As you can see here, the most rated recipe of New York Times cooking is a red lentil soup. And then they have jollof rice, which my son Krishna has made. And no knead bread, no knead as in KNEAD bread. That sounds good, published in 2006. Did you do bread making and things during the pandemic?
Absolutely, yeah. I have my go-to dill seed cottage cheese bread that I love making. I've got these jalapeno cheddar muffins that I make. And my sons really got into baking also during the pandemic. The kitchen was full and we were baking stuff all the time. Of course, put on an enormous amount of weight as a result, but it was fun.
Well, imagine living in a New York City apartment rather than in a house where you have a backyard and things like that. Buttermilk brined roast chicken is, and here's somebody who's been cooking for 60 years. That's a lot of roasted chicken. So glad to find this recipe. And here's, yeah.
sorry to interrupt. I just want to make sure we have a comment from LinkedIn. It's actually Cecilia J. Not sure why her name and picture aren't coming in, but she said she actually did use the New York Times Cooking for a recent recipe. So we know we have a lot of fans of New York Times Cooking watching our show. Cecilia, thank you for watching on LinkedIn.
Here's a cooking classic, viral before virality existed, published in 1983, the original plum torte. So if anybody's watching this and says, you know, I can't afford the New York Times Cooking app or to subscribe to the New York Times, it's available free. This special edition is available free at at Digimentors.group. Look for the New York Times Read Along button and scroll down to Subodh's handsome face, and you'll be able to download this dumpling tomato salad with chili crisp vinaigrette, crisp gnocchi. I'm so hungry right now. Coconut miso salmon curry, sheet pan baked feta, more than 16,000 five-star reviews. And this tells you also about the changing media landscape, Subodh, that you as a civil rights attorney have to be part of in the ecosystem, that the New York Times, the cooking section and the cooking app are part of their subscription things that they sell and are as important, may not be more important, but as important to grow and nurture as their news section. And that tells you how much the world has changed. Here's Al Pacino on the cover of the magazine. Have you seen Hunters, this show on Amazon Prime about, set in the 70s, late 70s, about Nazi hunters? And Al Pacino plays an incredibly complicated role that's hard to explain right now, but he's fantastic. And he's an old, as he is in real life, an older Al Pacino. And watching his life, right? You and I are old enough to have seen him as a young man, and grow old before our eyes.
I loved that show. And the second season went a little off track, but boy, that first season was rocking.
Yeah.
It was really great.
Yeah, this is a culture issue. So there'll be some people I absolutely know who they are, and then some folks I don't. This is Michael B. Jordan, a great actor in an ad, not in the story. And then here's the young Al Pacino that we know. We knew him even younger than this. This is in 1992 in Glengarry Glen.
I believe that all wisdom you need to know about the universe can be obtained by watching Godfathers Part 1 and Part 2.
Okay, there's a real endorsement of two Al Pacino productions. Okay, now here's we're going to do this. We're going to put you on the spot. One of the things I do is glance through the paper, and sometimes we find like column like The Ethicist. There's no right or wrong answer. It's an ethics question. So I haven't read the answer, and you haven't either, I presume. Question says, I'm a queer man who had a fling with another guy. Should his girlfriend be told? So this is not necessarily about this case, but what do you think about a story like that?
I think that the answer to that is so layered because it depends, right? It depends. There aren't enough details there. It's described as a fling, you know, a one-time tryst perhaps, then maybe not. Maybe it's not that individual's responsibility to inform. Maybe it's that individual's responsibility to talk to the person they had a fling with and urge them to tell their partner. But if it's more intimate than that, maybe there is some responsibility. So I don't think it's susceptible to an easy answer. But I'd be curious. I'm definitely going to read today and find out what the right answer is, at least according to The Ethicist. I suspect The Ethicist is going to say not your responsibility, but we'll see.
We'll see. Ron Thomas says, I wrote a leadership article based on The Godfather. Fantastic movie. Only 1 and 2. Ron, please share the link. Email us. We'd love to read it. We'll share it with Subodh also. And I didn't know you were such a great baker, but look at this. Life of Bread. In a perfect brioche, the secrets to devotional baking. I didn't know people could make brioche at home, but obviously they can. And it says here, and this is written just for you, some of the smartest, deepest, and most earnest people in our world are bakers. So there you go. You should show this to the boys as well, that you're all bakers, and that makes, now it all makes sense to me. The culture issue here, we are not going to have time to get through this. So everyone get your own New York Times and read this. I'll also just show you the arts and leisure cover is Aubrey Plaza, who I love on the Parks and Rec show. And I got the feeling that your work at the law director, working in the city of Cleveland, would have been a little bit like what we saw on Parks and Rec. I don't know if you've seen that show.
It was more like The Wire.
Okay. Which is simultaneously exciting and scary that it was like that.
Yeah, I wish it had been more like Parks and Rec, but it was more like The Wire. A combination of The Wire and The Office.
Okay, and the Office. Kaveri says, fantastic. So thank you to both for educating on the very harsh realities of special immunities and the implications of civil rights. Kaveri, thank you so much. You've got to come and visit New York, and we want everyone to meet you. The Metro cover is telling us that Punk's not dead. It's just renovating. An oft-evicted Lower East Side Center for Artists and Anarchists gets a gleaming new home, and a partnership aims to reinvent Hudson Square. And then real estate cover is, it's about more than math. People trying to decide whether to buy or rent also have to compare neighborhoods, schools, lifestyles, and commutes. And we've seen a housing crisis across the US, as you know, and some of that also has now become, of course, very political. So what we're going to do now, if it's okay with you, Subodh, is we're going to take you off camera for a moment to just relax. And we're going to come back to you. We're going to do some housekeeping, pay some bills, and then we're going to come back to you to give us some kind of final thoughts on where we are. Also look ahead a little bit, please, not just to the elections, but give us a scenario of what it means for civil rights and human rights and social justice if the election goes one way or the other. And please, of course, as you know better than anyone, not to forget the downstate, down ballot races, because America is not just at the top. America is things happening every day at every level of the American experience with the government. So we'll bring you right back, folks. That's Subodh Chandra. What a great show. Neil is going to come back as well and join me here. We are so grateful to Subodh for being with us, being the same guy you met in '94, I met a couple of years later, and that energy, that fight for civil rights, I admire him so much for doing that on behalf of all of us. And as he said, when the Haitians are being slammed like that, we're all being slammed because it's othering of everybody, not just some. That's how this country was built, othering people. And we are seeing that here as well. Ellen says, as paraphrased by Pastor Martin Niemöller, hate must be stopped immediately because you're next and there will be no one left to speak up, that famous set of lines that we all know. Neil, let's thank everyone for watching, and let's thank, of course, our sponsor, our friends at Muckrack, for being with us for all of these years. We love Muckrack. If you want to connect with journalists, there is no better tool to use than Muckrack. And if you're a journalist, free access to Muckrack is super helpful for you. If you'd like to be a sponsor, please join us. Write to me at Digimentors.group or Neil@Digimentors.group. We also want to tell you that Digimentors does a whole variety of things, including digital marketing, PR. We build shows like this. We do training and workshops, including my AI workshops that we also now do AI policy, strategy, scenario planning. If you have a company, a corporation, a nonprofit, a small group that just wants to learn AI without being worried and scared, we can do something for you on Zoom or in person. We also do event amplification where we blow up events, make them much bigger. So talk to us at Digimentors.group. We are blessed to work with some of the most important organizations in the world and some very small organizations that are going to do big things. And we are very, very grateful that we can do that. I also want to show our newsletter that we write on Sundays. It's called Sri's Sunday Note. And last week was lessons from 3 important convenings that I was part of and honored to be part of: the Nobel Peace Conference, the Jaipur Literature Festival's USA editions, and the Chief AI Officer Summit. And the fact that we can work with such great organizations is a blessing. And we'll just scroll up a little bit here to show you that this photo is of October 2nd, was my mother's 75th birthday. She passed a year and a half ago, and she was thrilled to share her birthday with Mahatma Gandhi on his 155th birthday on the same day. I went to Union Square Park to see Mahatma Gandhi and think of my mother. And I've said here two great souls, because many of you know that the word Mahatma is not his name, but means great soul. And they had a set of silk scarves on him, and I was very moved to be there and think of my mom, who was so happy to do great charity work around the world, and she would have loved to have celebrated her 75th birthday, but like a lot of people, would not have wanted anyone to know she was 75. Neil, she wanted me to dye my hair when it was turning gray, because people would know that she has an old son that was so old. And then when I lost my hair, she had to give up. But she closely guarded her own age, but her energy is still with me every single day, and I'm so grateful to her and to everyone who inquired and asked. And you can find my newsletter at Substack, streenet.substack.com. We're so grateful to everyone who's already subscribed or who's subscribed and hasn't opened last week's yet. You can, and there will be a newsletter going out today. So many great comments coming in. Thank you, everybody, for watching. It means so much to have us. We want to remind you about Neil's show, which is coming up. We have an episode with Stephen Berbecco of the United Way of Northwest Vermont's Mental Health Initiative. One of the things you can do, folks, is if you have family or friends that are reluctant to talk about mental health, Neil and Don do this in such a kind and gentle manner, without being preachy, judgy, or any of those things. And you will learn a lot, and you can ask questions. And Neil is always available to you, because this is on a mission to help you if you have questions about this. So please reach out to him, neil@digimentors.group. And I see here that Jonathan says, my grandmother was the same way. She would only admit to being over 21. When she died at 95, she was still only over 21. And I'm sure she is smiling right now hearing that comment, Jonathan. She raised or helped her family, brought out a great grandson in you. So may her memory be a blessing, as we say here in New York City.
Sri, before we bring on Subodh, I want to also mention we have a show coming up on Tuesday, South Asians Stand Up for Kamala, an incredible event. You can register on this bit.ly link that we're going to show at the bottom of the screen in just a moment. It's bit.ly South Asians Laugh 2024. Here we go. We're going to be producing the show. Incredible A-list celebrities from the South Asian community, comedians. Certainly encourage you to join us. This is a follow-up on our work, South Asian Men for Harris and Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander Men for Kamala that we produced earlier in the year. So hopefully folks will be able to join us Tuesday, 9 p.m. Eastern time.
Yeah, and this will be a fantastic show. Look at the lineup, and here we're looking at the social media has just started. South Asians Stand Up, so S and S there. Please take a look, but the rundown is amazing. Kumail Nanjiani, Padma
Scroll
Lakshmi.
down.
Yeah,
scroll down on their Instagram. You'll see
all kinds of great folks are standing up for Kamala. Look at these folks, some hot young stars, and folks who are, their faces from Marvel movies or from your television or from and the hosts are Malik Pancholi and Sheetal Shet. So this is going to be a fantastic show. Please join us on Tuesday night, 9 p.m. Eastern time, and encourage your friends and family, and especially if you have folks who are reluctant to vote for Kamala because they don't know enough about her. They say things like that. At least let them laugh with Kamala. And as you know, the right, Donald Trump and others, have tried to weaponize her own laughter and her own joy in a terrible way. And we're going to use that laughter to help bring attention to the issues. So let's bring Subodh back.
Yeah, let's bring Subodh back. I know Subodh has somewhere to be. So Subodh, thank you for staying with us. Sorry, we're going just a few minutes past 10 o'clock, but it's been incredible to have you on. And as Sri mentioned, we've all known each other for so many years. It's great to have family on the show. So please, Subodh, over to you.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me on. It's been a delight, and I can't wait to actually go read in detail now every article that Sri pointed out from the New York Times, especially the cooking section, right? I got to just say this final message to the folks listening. We've spent our whole lives hearing politicians and others say this is the most important election in your lifetime. I think this really is it. This is it. We actually have a choice now between keeping our democracy and restoring it versus somebody who's actively tried to destroy it, somebody who has vowed to be a dictator on day one, somebody who has vowed that he's going to somehow pardon a bunch of people who stormed the Capitol and engaged in an insurrection, somebody who is stoking hate and racial and xenophobic hatred. So these are our choices. It means we have to step up individually and vote, but it also means we have to talk to our friends. And if we have friends in Michigan and Arizona and Pennsylvania and Georgia and North Carolina, then we've got to call those friends and urge them to turn out and get their friends to turn out. Everything's at stake. Everything's on the line. Once we secure our democracy, then we can do the good work of continuing to form a more perfect union and engage with the world. But we've got to protect our democracy first and foremost. So I hope everybody will join me in that mission, because our civil rights will be meaningless if we lose this one.
So well put. That's Subodh Chandra. Folks, if you need a lawyer in Ohio, you know who to go to. If he can't work with you for whatever your case is, I'm sure he'll make great referrals. But every day he fights for ordinary Americans and is making a difference. We're very proud of you, Subodh, for what you've done, public service in so many different ways. And you, as Ron has said, this is a master class, and we learned from you. I am super grateful. We will let you go, get on with your Sunday. And thank you, everybody, for watching. Say goodbye. We'll see you all soon. Thank you very much. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
And get the cooking